Hello, and welcome to another Mono Red Aggro Masterclass, as I've decided to start calling them. Today is going to be a pretty direct sequel to last week's video, which, again, shout out to Marcus Aurelius over on Patreon for commissioning last week's video. And then um, a lot of you enjoyed last week's video. Marcus also enjoyed last week's video, and so the good news is he commissioned a sequel. So that's what we'll be doing today. Today's video is going to be pretty much the same format. It'll be talking about magic, talking about strategy, talking about how I'm going to approach playing out these hands. And today we'll have a bit more of a focus on the sequencing than just the keeper maul. So last week was pretty balanced. Today we're gonna look at more heuristics of how I'm going to approach sequencing these hands, and I'm gonna quickly look at the deck list. It's changed a little bit since last time. Then we'll do a little bit of a top level without looking at any specific hand, how I generally approach sequencing, and then we'll dive back into that same activity of last time of just going through the interesting hands and looking at how I would approach sequencing there. So here's the deck list we'll be working with today, and the deck list that I'll probably be sending my students with to Hartford, and unless anything, you know, super interesting happens between here and there. But quite similar to last time, we're just a little more teched for our Izzet overlords who have really taken over the format. So we've snuck a main deck Magebane Lizard over one of our Tursas. It's always a good idea to have 3 copies of your legendary creatures instead of 4 anyway. So that's kind of free real estate. And then we've swapped away 2 of our lightning strikes. One has come a Witchstalker Frenzy to make sure that those big creatures fall quickly. Izzet isn't the only deck in the format, and Jeskai Oculus has also taken up a pretty big percentage of it, not to mention the Jeskai control decks that play those big X5s. And then we did swap one of them to an Abrade, which is going to be, a lightning strike in a lot of cases, but it can knock down that Corey Steel Cutter. Just some small changes to better adapt to the meta at hand, but not too much because Mono Red has a really great plan A. That's kind of why we're here, and that's one of the great things about sequencing with the deck. And we'll kind of dive into that first section I promised you on, you know, as an overview. I develop when I can, disrupt when I have to, and try my absolute best to never do just stone cold nothing. And the great thing about the red deck is we have such a great plan A, and when we have a hand where we can just curve out our threats 1, 2, 3, it's a very powerful deck doing a very powerful thing, and you know we're glad to be doing it. We're doing it without too much risk, and what that means is if I have 2 lands and all threats, there's a lot of times where I'm just going to play out my threats. I'm gonna send out my Heartfire hero, and then I'm gonna send out my Manifold Mouse, and then I'm gonna follow that up with Emberheart Challenger. And if my opponent has disruption, that's fine because I have redundancy. And if they kill the hero, well, now Challenger's coming in, and if they kill the Manifold Mouse, they're gonna be really bummed if I have a backup Manifold to keep growing that hero. And so one thing that we didn't do a lot in last week's video is we didn't talk about a sequence where I'm just like turn 1 threat, turn 2 threat, turn 3 threat, turn 4 threat, because those hands are kind of easy. The thesis statement or the topic for the video was uh, dive into the difficult hands. And those are where we're using a lot of tactics, and we're having this like difficult discussion and strategization in our head of like, how do I balance developing my game plan with walking into removal, with, do I need to like kill my opponent's turn one Mako? Do I need to disrupt what they've got going on? Um, but as a default, with mono red, I'm the beatdown. I want to play my spells. I want to present my threats, and I want to, get off to a fast start, and then continue to press my advantage throughout the middle game, and use some of my finishers like Screaming Nemesis or my burn spells to ultimately close out the game. And where things start to get interesting is when my hand doesn't have as many threats, or where I'm playing against an opponent that's ultra interactive. And so we will kind of see some example hands here as I scroll back down to my hand selector and talk about, what do we do? How do we sequence? How do I turn this interesting hand, like 3 lands, 2 burst lightning, and a Heartfire hero? How do I press this to victory? Um, which can be hard. These are the hard hands. That's kind of why we're talking about them. And so, looking at this hand, diving into the activity of Keeper Mull, we instantly have a pretty interesting one. Um, I think it's a pretty clear keep. We have good cards. We have a balanced hand, and 3 lands and a Nemesis can go a long way in a lot of matchups. Um, but as we've talked about, sequencing can be very difficult. So, for example, against a red deck, against a mid-range deck, I don't want to play my Heartfire hero on turn one. Whether I'm on the play or on the draw, just feeding a naked hero to my opponent's removal is very unproductive. Against a more controlling deck where we don't see a lot of 1 mana removal, then I'm perfectly okay with running out Heartfire Hero on turn one. And against those, Authority of the Consoles, High Noon, Temporary Lockdown decks, I'm actually pretty excited about that because I have this Rockface Village. Rockface Village is the secret MVP that makes this hand a pretty clear keep instead of something that's questionable. Because now against this deck that is looking at casting hate pieces on early turns, that's looking at maybe using a lockdown to get a big X for one. Instead, on turn one, I present my threat, and on turn two, I just use Rockface Village to get in for 3. And I am not overextending, and I'm simply using my resources that I already have, my free damage, to pluck away at my opponent's life total. And then I'm going to be happy to play Nemesis on 3 as Nemesis escapes the threat of Temp Lockdown. The one thing that I do want to look out for against something like, say, Jeskai Control is I don't particularly want Nemesis to die to Lightning Helix. I do get to reflect the damage back at them, which is nice. It turns off the life gain after they've gained their 3 from the first Helix, meaning at least the future Helixes don't gain life for them. But I would still love to use some finesse here, and that's kind of what the theme is. And one of the questions I got is like, I don't know when to just like jam my spells and kill my opponent versus when to take this careful finesse plan that we talked about in the last video. And I think the nature of the topic is why we like continue to talk about finesse over and over again, because when you have less resources, you really have to use finesse to maximize those resources. So this is a hand where I've got this double burst lightning. If I'm playing against something more controlling, I'm really hoping to create an opportunity for myself to burst my Nemesis and turn off my opponent's life gain. Or if I'm playing against that Lightning Helix deck, in a perfect world, I'll draw Monstrous Rage in the first couple turns, And then I'll be able to use Monstrous Rage to protect my Screaming Nemesis from a Lightning Helix. But the ultimately on all of these kind of difficult hands, the ones that are borderline, the ones that aren't snap keeps, um, we're going to find that we want to look for opportunities for finesse in our sequencing, because with mono red, you're either winning via sheer power, which means you're just curving threat, 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 threat. You just have this really perfect curve, or you're winning through finesse, which the deck is, it certainly doesn't have a reputation for finesse, and plenty of people like to complain about Monstrous Rage, and I'm sure, if you're here, you understand that casting Monstrous Rage really does uh, take some finesse, but many people think it's just, another red card that you just cast and hope for the best. Uh, but it's not. It's an important defensive tool. It's an important offensive tool. It's a card that does a lot of interesting things when we don't get this just perfect hand of like, okay, I curved Heartfire Hero into Manifold Mouse, into Emberheart Challenger, into now I have this, double Monstrous Rage and good luck opponent kind of deal. And yeah. So doubling back to how exactly I would sequence this specific hand, that really covers what I'm going to do in the control matchup. In something like an aggro matchup or a mid-range matchup, I'm going to be a lot more careful with my Hardfire Hero. I don't have that many threats, and I don't particularly want to give away one of my most premium threats for free. And so I'm going to mount and go with this hand. And if I'm on the draw, believe it or not, there's a lot of times where I'm happier to play mount and go than I am on the play. Mount and go on the play feels a little weak because I really want to start the game faster than my opponent. If I'm going first, I want to take advantage of that. Um, but there's a lot of risk in that I only have the two threats. So I would say, on the play, depends on the day. There's definitely times where I would just run out the Heartfire Hero and hope for the best. Just because I think Mount and Go is so passive. But with only having two threats in hand, I think on good days, I would still Mount and Go when I'm on the play. The reason that I'm more excited about Mount and Go on the draw is because Standard has a lot of 2 mana spells, or creatures more specifically, that can be dealt with via Burst Lightning. And I talked about this last time, and I've talked about this, 1,000 times. Turning your Burst Lightning into a Spell Snare is an incredible way to take being on the draw and turn it into an advantage and be able to kind of turn the tables early on. And a reminder for those who aren't familiar with Spell Snare, it's a modern staple. It's a very good card. For 1 blue mana, it simply says counter target spell with converted mana cost 2. And as you can imagine, if on turn 1 I play my land and pass, and with that 1 mana, I'm able to counter my opponent's 2 mana spell that they cast on turn 2. Now we go to my turn 2, and I'm free and clear to do something proactive and interesting. And what's nice about, again, as we've talked about last week, Monstrous Rage doesn't have to be in your hand to impact the game. So we talk about, I don't want to play Heartfire Hero on turn 1. And you look at this hand and you go, well, you don't have Monstrous Rage. What does playing it on turn 2 do for you? Well, on turn 2, when I leave up that mountain, my opponent is going to be thinking, well, they might have Monstrous Rage. And you don't have to have Monstrous Rage to leverage Monstrous Rage. That's what we all do. That's what everyone does. That's what every good player is doing. If you have 1 red mana available, the first thing they're going to think about is, okay, What if my opponent has Monstrous Rage? How does that affect the way that I'm going to play? And then you move down to Burst Lightning, because Burst Lightning can affect your play patterns as well. But Monstrous Rage is far and away the scariest thing that a red player can do with 1 mana. And so anyone kind of playing high level Magic is going to give that 1 red mana some level of respect. They're not going to simply Burst Lightning your Heartfire hero when you have a mountain available, unless they have like X-ray vision, or they're on the other end of the spectrum and just playing their cards and not really thinking. But going back to what do I mean by Burst Lightning can be Spell Snare. If you're playing in a Mouse Mirror, then there's a good chance your opponent could play Manifold Mouse or Emberheart Challenger on turn 2. And using your turn 1 Mountain to shock their turn 2 Mouse is a Spell Snare. The other thing that's more relevant now than it was last week when we talked about this is, Dimir Midrange is on the rise. Deep Cavern Bat is back in part of our conversations again. And if your opponent casts Deep Cavern Bat, then after Deep Cavern Bat resolves, it has an ETB trigger to look at your hand and take one of your cards. You can respond to that ETB trigger by shooting the bat with your Burst Lightning. The bat dies. The trigger still happens. They get to look at your hand, but they don't get to take a card from your hand. Now, in this case, I have 2 Burst Lightnings, and so if my opponent were looking at my hand, they would go, huh, darn. And there's a lot of ways to think about what to take there. This isn't a how to play Deep Cavern Bat video, so I won't dive into that. But because you have 2 Burst Lightnings, their Deep Cavern Bat isn't very good. However, if you only had 1 Burst Lightning, Bat takes your Burst Lightning, and you simply can't kill it. And you're kind of begging for that top deck, because the Bat is just so annoying. It drains 1 every turn. If they find some maps, it can get up to 2 or even 3 power. They can start drawing cards off of it with Curiosity. So you really don't want to lose a card to their Bat, and you certainly don't want them gaining life from the Bat. And so Mount and Go is actually a surprisingly useful line against the Dimir Midrange or any Deep Cavern Bat kind of deck, because not only do you protect your Burst Lightning from getting stolen, you also get rid of that pesky little lifelink threat. And so yeah, this is an interesting hand. It's definitely not one of those snap keeps where I just get to jam all my threats and my opponent probably just dies. But it is a hand that does a lot of interesting things. We have Hero combined with Rockface. We have Nemesis combined with Burst Lightning. We have the individual power of Nemesis being very, very strong in those red mirrors. And we have the individual power of Burst Lightning just being a great flexible card. The one deck we haven't really talked about yet that's very important for everyone and everything right now is the Izzet deck. And that's where this hand is okay. You definitely can't mulligan this. It's too good to mulligan. But one of the best things about the Izzet deck is that it can't get spell snared by your Burst Lightning. Whether they're playing Quarry Steelcutter, Slick Shot Show Off, or Draycatcher, which is a 1/3 with prowess. The Burst Lightning is not going to be online turn 2. And so maybe against Izzet, especially on the play, I'm just going to take that risk and play my hero and try to get the game started, because they can really snowball you with the Quarry Steelcutter and put you in a spot where you just simply can't keep up. This hand feels pretty bad against an Izzet deck. The Burst Lightning, maybe you think, oh, that's pretty good because it can shut down Slick Shot. Some decks are on 2, not 4, and they're always going to plot it. And, a good Izzet player probably isn't ever going to expose Slick Shot to Burst Lightning unless they have a Monstrous Rage to back it up. So the Burst Lightning maybe looks better than it actually is against the Izzet deck. I think I would rather have something a little faster and a little more threat dense. Maybe I look for a 6 that has that, really great threat density where I can threaten their life total faster than hopefully they can threaten mine. One land, go away. One land, go away. Two lands. Hardclaw, Hero, Challenger, Nemesis, Tursa. Um, this is a fantastic hand. Obviously, all all you can really do here is play your threats. So not much to talk about. But this is one of those hands where we talked about. This is classic mono red hand where I'm gonna play my threat. Um, the thing to point out is in general, I'll play Nemesis before I play Tursa. The longer Tursa's in your hand, the more there's a chance that you'll have cards you want to get rid of to her. So, assuming you find that land drop on time, um, I'm happy to hold on to Tursa a little bit longer than Nemesis. And the other thing with this hand is that I'll probably play Hired Claw before I play Heartfire Hero, simply because I don't anticipate triggering Valiant on turn 2. I think I would either chain my 1-drops and again use my Mountain as a threat of Monstrous Rage to try and protect my 1-drops. It's rare that I'm going to play Emberheart Challenger on turn 2, just because, as we talked about, um, if you play a Challenger, you can get spell snared by Burst Lightning, which is an incredibly popular card right now. Cut Down also spell snares you when you try to play Emberheart Challenger. And so I'm going to be quite vigilant about, when I'm on the draw, I want to cast Spell Snare. When I'm on the play, or even on the draw, I don't want to get Spell Snared. So that is a bit of a weakness in this hand, is that, there's a pretty clear route to going turn 1 Hired Claw, turn 2 Hero. But if I don't find more land, it does get a bit difficult to cast the challengers and the challenger and the 3-drops. Still a keep, too many good cards. I think it would be really, really hard to mulligan this. But I think if you're playing against a deck with shocks or cut downs, you definitely need to be careful as you sequence this. Just like we want to be the one casting spell snare, not the one getting spell snared. All right, so if I'm on the play against Izzet, I'm really excited because I get to just play my turn 2 Mage Bane Lizard and kind of hide behind that. Especially game 1, I'm feeling quite excited by that. I have the Lightning Strike too, so if they try to go the Drake Catcher strategy to go around my Mage Bane, then I can just snipe that Drake Catcher before it starts really going off. And one of the questions that I promised to kind of answer and address throughout this video when we talk about sequencing is, when do I care about something a lot and I kill it right away, versus when do I kind of ignore something and play out my threats? And this hand presents a really great some great complexities with that. So we'll talk about the Izzet matchup specifically, and we'll talk about Drake Catcher. So let's say I'm on the play. Obviously, I'm running out Mage Bane turn 2. Let's say my opponent plays Drake Catcher on turn 3. I think instinctively most people they play Drake Catcher on their turn 2. What do we do on turn 3? There's a few there's things worth considering, right? So let's assume I found my 3rd land. There's Screaming Nemesis, being very mana efficient. There's Emberheart Challenger plus Monstrous Rage, again being very mana efficient and resolving Monstrous Rage while my opponent is tapped out, putting Emberheart Challenger up to 3/3. And then there's that last option of, do I just Lightning Strike this Drake Hatcher while I can? And this threat analysis is really important and difficult when it comes to Magic. Um, but a lot of times, what you need to do is you need to ask yourself, how do I lose this game? Especially when you're ahead. And if you play a turn two Magebane Lizard, you're ahead. You're on the play. You ran out your Magebane Lizard game one on turn two. You're ahead. It's your game to lose. You need to kind of figure out how you lose this game and make sure that doesn't happen. And if you take one of those proactive lines with Nemesis or Emberheart Challenger, um, you're pressing your advantage, you're pressuring your opponent's life total, but you're also giving them a window to stabilize and fight back in a pretty significant way, because if they resolve Monstrous Rage on their Draycatcher, or worse yet, a cantrip in a Monstrous Rage, then Hatcher is already at 6 power, and they're making 2 Drakes, which is a lot of bodies. 2/2/2s, that's 4 power, 4 toughness going on the board. Not to mention, and this is probably the most important part, now Draycatcher is a 2/4, and your Lightning Strike is no longer good. Your money's no longer good here. And so in this case, as much as I probably want to continue to press my advantage, one of the few ways I lose this game is my opponent getting to resolve Monstrous Rage on their Draycatcher. And so I'm going to Lightning Strike the Draycatcher while they're tapped out, for sure. It's not a risk that I'm willing to take, because they can, on the very next turn, do so much damage with that Draycatcher. And again, you have 3 mana. Casting Nemesis against a red deck pretty much always feels good. Getting Flood Mod feels bad, but if you're ahead, it doesn't feel that bad. And again, you've established Magebane right away, and then you've killed their best threat right away. Now you're in a pretty great position, unless their hand is absolutely cracked, right? And so if you play out Nemesis and it gets bounced, it's kind of And then you have your 3 mana, so whenever you play Emberheart Challenger, not only do you have the extra land to threaten Monstrous Rage, you actually have the Monstrous Rage. So if your opponent tries to make you have it, um, you get to punish them for that. And if they have double removal, all they've done is 1-for-1 you, and they took damage along the way because of Magebane Lizard. And so that's on the play. It's a little bit easier because you get to establish this Magebane for free on the early turn. Then we go to, well, if I'm on the draw and my opponent plays Draycatcher on turn 2, now what do I do? Now, first of all, if they don't play Draycatcher on turn 2, you're probably just playing Magebane Lizard. There's not a lot of, if they plot Slickshot, what are you going to do about it? Play Magebane. They cast Corey Steelcutter, what are you going to do about it? Just, play Magebane. Being on the draw sucks. You're going to have an uphill battle. If they don't give you an opportunity to interact, then you run out of threat. But let's say they play Draycatcher. Do you establish and start hiding behind your Magebane? Or do you Lightning Strike it? And as much as it feels bad to just go even with them, strike it, and give them a free pass to do what they need to do on turn 3 before you get to start establishing your plan of killing your opponent and reducing their life total to 0. Again, we double back to this, if the Izzet player resolves Monstrous Rage on Draycatcher, you're cooked. You're cooked. You can't let it happen. And that's why in both of these scenarios, not only are we striking the Draycatcher, we're doing it at sorcery speed on our turn. Draycatcher also has prowess. So as much as we would love to respond to their Monstrous Rage and Lightning Strike their Draycatcher, get a cute little 2-for-1, it is way too dangerous to play that game. If it's something like Slickshot, then Lightning Strike is really OP. Same with Braid, where dealing 3 damage to a Slick Shot pretty much guarantees it's going to die. Monstrous Rage doesn't save it in that scenario. Um, Slick Shot is an amazing card, but not being able to increase his own toughness is certainly a tangible downside that makes him somewhat balanced. And so you're not going to really be able to play chicken with a Drake Hatcher when all you have is a Lightning Strike. You need to just, all right, opponent tapped out. They haven't resolved their Monstrous Rage yet. Kill the Hatcher before it takes over this game. Against not Izzet. This hand is still pretty stacked, honestly. You're generally, not going to be super excited about Mage Bane unless you're playing against Izzet or maybe Omniscience combo. But we've got Challenger, we've got Rage, we've got Lightning Strike. Mage Bane Lizard's going to deal some damage. And we're never unhappy to see Screaming Nemesis in the chat. It's a great card. Three lands, Hero, Rage, Frenzy, Nemesis. It's a good hand. I think it's almost like, we just skip and go to the next one. I think it's too good. Also very good. A little slow. We're not starting the game very fast, but double Nemesis against any red deck is really hard to throw away. This deck is good. Not a lot of, borderline hands. This one looks a lot like one we saw earlier. Oh. Yeah. This is a tough one. This is one that makes me think. This is one where I feel like if I say I would mulligan this, people are going to come in the comments and be like, how could you mulligan double Manifold Mouse? Not to mention Screaming Nemesis being there to back it up. We have 4 lands. So reasonably our curve is like Manifold Mouse, Screaming Nemesis, and then Offspring Manifold Mouse. You could almost argue that the second Manifold Mouse is like 2 creatures because you've got 4 lands. This is a tough one. It lives right on the edge because, let's say, for example, I'm playing against another red deck. I'm really happy to see Screaming Nemesis, but I'm very unhappy that the only thing I can do on turn 2 is play Manifold Mouse because, again, I'm going to get spell snared. It's going to happen. Boy, oh boy. I think it's pretty slow. I think more often than not, I'm just going to mulligan this. I just have a hard time putting together a sequence that feels good. And as promised, this is like, we want to focus more on the sequencing than anything else in today's episode, so to speak. And there's just not a good sequence. Playing Manifold Mouse on turn 2 and into an empty board doesn't feel good. Playing Nemesis on turn 3 is generally something that I'm happy with. But there's just not a lot of tools supporting our threats. It's definitely not a hand that I'm excited about. I think in general it looks keepable, but when you try to sequence it, it feels a lot less keepable. That's not to say you couldn't draw into it. This is one of those hands with a lot of potential. You don't have to win the whole game with your first 7 cards. You do get to draw more. I'm not saying it's unkeepable, but I think on average, I would probably rather mulligan this. Oh. Ooh. These 4-laners are tough, but having both Rockface and Soulstone makes it quite good. Having Burst Lightning and Lightning Strike, also pretty good. Especially if I'm on the draw, get to be interactive, get to kind of keep my opponent off their plan A in the first couple turns if I'm playing against an aggro deck, which is a pretty massive percentage of the meta. But that only leaves room for 1 threat, which is not a lot. Again, let's say I'm on the draw against another mouse deck. I'm probably fine with this. I have Rockface, I have Soulstone, I, got this Burst Lightning and Lightning Strike to keep my opponent from doing anything interesting for the first few turns, which gives me time to find more threats. But against anything other than aggro, I'm probably not going to keep this hand. It doesn't feel like a winning formula to start slow, especially this slow with like double interaction, 1 single threat, and it's Emberheart Challenger. Against any kind of mid-range or control deck, you would really need to draw particularly well in order to take down a deck like that. Because again, when we focus on the sequencing, it's pretty clear to see how you could sequence this hand against another red deck, which is trying to be fast. And like we talked about, you could even, on the draw, you're happy about that turn 1 Burst Lightning against the Deep Cavern pad. But as we get into turns 3 and 4, and our game plan is like, hopefully I drew more cards, because if I didn't draw anything good, I'm like, lightning striking, not a Preacher. Preacher's too big for Lightning Strike. Or just running Challenger into death. So, yeah, I mean, these are good cards. I'm probably sitting here wanting to keep this, but again, it's hard to put together a sequence against, especially, this hand does nothing against a lockdown deck. Soulstone Sanctuary is not going to solo the game for you. This is a fun hand. This is kind of... We don't want to talk too much about the really good hands, but one of the questions was like, when do I just jam my spells and kill my opponent? Here. This is a really good illustration of when the red deck and the mouse deck are just so good. Because you play your turn 1 hero, then you play your turn 2 manifold. Even if they snipe the manifold, they were playing patient. Or if you get to put 1 counter on the hero. When you have hero and manifold, people often ask me, like, which one do I kill, hero or manifold? Can't remember if I did this on the last video or not. But basically, let's say I'm playing against this hand. Or any mouse deck that starts hero manifold. If I kill Heartfire Hero and let Manifold Mouse live, then I'm going to be unhappy if my opponent plays another hero, of which there's 3 in the deck, or an Emberheart Challenger, of which there's 4 in the deck. So there's 7 cards left that make me unhappy. If I kill Manifold Mouse, then I'm only really unhappy if they cast another Manifold Mouse. Because there's just 3 left in the deck, right? So, say your opponent didn't hold up Spell Snare. Instead, you did get to trigger Valiant once. Now your hero's a 2/2. And your Manifold is just chilling as a 1/2. A lot of people will sorcery speed their removal against red because they don't want to get blown out by Monstrous Rage, right? If you're playing against another red deck. So they kill the Manifold Mouse, and then you play a new one. And this does 2 really cool things. 1, you get to keep the train going with Heartfire Hero. And 2, your opponent is going to, Magic is a mental game, and your opponent goes, "Ow, why didn't I kill the hero? They had a backup Manifold Mouse." You, like, anytime you present those two mice to your opponent, you force them to kind of make this decision, which, again, I don't think is, like, I think you can pretty quickly look at the math and know that killing Manifold Mouse is more correct. However, it's a question, in my experience, that a lot of players have. And for people who don't just like have the I know I'm gonna kill Manifold Mouse. If they have another one, it's not a big deal. I've seen many people get frustrated by like, oh, of course they had the other one, and when we're frustrated, we don't play Magic as well, and so these hands with backup mice are not only good because they're good Magic cards that are going to help you deal damage and reduce your opponent's life total to 0. They're also good Magic cards in that, something as simple as playing a Manifold Mouse on turn 2, your opponent killing it, and then you play another Manifold Mouse on turn 3 can really put someone on a little bit of tilt, because then they start to think, oh, I should have killed the Heartfire hero since you had a backup Manifold Mouse. And the fun thing about this hand is you get to do that to your opponent no matter what. If they kill Manifold, you play another Manifold, and they're like, why didn't I kill Hero? If they kill Hero, you just play another Hero, and they'll be like, oh, why didn't I kill Manifold? Not that the goal of Magic is to tilt your opponent, but Magic is a mental game. And if your opponent feels like they made a mistake, which this sets up, then that's generally a net positive for you. You know, you want to win the game, and that's going to, be one of those microscopic things that works out in your favor. Nope. A lot of hands like this. A lot of hero, nemesis, burn spell hands, which are really interesting. And one of the things requested for this video was heuristics. And playing hero on 1 when you're light on threats is a bad idea. Because even if you don't have the Monstrous Rage, playing hero on 2 uses the threat of Monstrous Rage to help keep him alive long enough to matter. Ooh. Okay, very nice. Good time to point out the synergy of Magebane and Hired Claw. Magebane is a lizard. And so, let's say we sequence out this hand and play Hired Claw on 1, Magebane on 2. Hired Claw has died. You play your Hired Claw on turn 3. Well, when you attack with your Magebane lizard, you're going to trigger that fresh Hired Claw that has just come out of your hand. It doesn't have haste, but you're still going to get 1 damage out of it. Which makes it pretty important to, 1, like, play your Hired Claw before combat. And 2, attack with your Magebane if you can. Having double Hired Claw, or sometimes even triple Hired Claw, there's just so much upside to playing out your claws that's what I'm going to do 9 times out of 10. I have a backup claw. I also have an Emberheart Challenger. One thing I'm going to think about with, we talked about cut down and shock as ways of spell snaring Emberheart. Well, if your opponent uses their 1 mana removal on your 1 mana threats, then they're not going to be able to spell snare your Emberheart Challenger. They're going to have additional removal or premium removal to knock that out. So this is one of those pretty great hands, to be honest. I really like playing Hired Claw on turn 1 and then again on turn 2 here, being able to attack on turn 2 with your first Hired Claw and trigger both claws, so you're going to deal 3 damage, is a really, really big upside. What this also does, so let's go full circle here. You're on the play. You play Hard Claw and pass. Your opponent's playing a red deck. They have seen this video, and so they go Mountain Pass, holding up a Burst Lightning, because they want to Spell Snare you. So now, you go Mountain. Don't play Emberheart Challenger, because you're watching this video, and you know not to play Emberheart Challenger on turn 2. What you do is you play the second Hired Claw, and you do not touch the second Mountain. And now, your opponent is in a really bad spot. If they let you go to combat, they're going to take 3 damage. If they cast that Burst Lightning that they hold up to Spell Snare you, they run the risk of effectively losing the game on the spot to Monstrous Rage. Because if they Burst Lightning and you have Monstrous Rage for that active Hired Claw, now they're taking 4, 5, 6 damage. You have a 2-3 Hired Claw and a 1-2 Hired Claw. And they're about to play their second Mountain. And so they're stuck. They can't cast that Burst Lightning. So instead they have to take 3. There's a lot of, chess, right? If everybody's playing correctly, naturally advantage goes to whomever is on the play and or has the better hand, right? But a lot of play and counterplay there for the correct lines, right? As someone on the play, you want to beware of the Spell Snare. And going like turn 1 Hard Claw into turn 2 Hired Claw is probably the best way that this deck can play around that. So I would call this, opener near perfect against another red deck, especially, against Izzet, because I also have this Magebane Lizard that I get to play probably on turn 3. You could argue that, would probably swap Tersa for Nemesis and swap Emberheart for like a piece of interaction to make the hand perfect. But if you're on the play, just threats are threats, man. You just push. But what's really, really cool about this hand is that Hired Claw on 1 and 2 is not only like individually powerful, but it's also one of those things that's extra powerful with the threat of Monstrous Rage and against the turn 1 removal spells that can be so good coming out of your opponent's deck. Can't complain about Hero, Manifold, Lizard, Challenger, 3 lands. All gravy. That's not a keep. I like this. This is a keep. This is a tough one. Let's work through our matchups. Let's work through our play draw. Because I actually have the Monstrous Rage, and I don't have anything else to do on turn 2 anyway. Again, there's some pretty consistent themes here. There's some, things that can be, broken down into heuristics, as we like to call them. Risking Hired Claw into shock or cut down when we don't have anything else to do on turn 2 anyway doesn't really make a lot of sense. So whether I'm on the play or the draw, against any kind of shock deck or cut down deck, those decks with a really efficient removal, I have no motivation to play Hard Claw on turn 1 and potentially just sacrifice him and not have anything at all to do on turn 2. Move forward to turn 2, we have Hired Claw, and we get to hold up mana. And just like the threat of Monstrous Rage is real, the threat of Burst Lightning is real too, right? You need to remember that your opponent doesn't actually know what's in your hand. So anytime you have a mountain, you are signaling to your opponent that you either have Monstrous Rage or you have Burst Lightning. Or you have nothing, but we never have nothing. We're good. We're good at Magic. And so your mountain is very powerful because it makes your opponent question, can I run this threat out right now? Or do they have one of their 4 to 6 shock effects? It also makes them question, can I kill their threat right now? Or do they have one of their 4 monstrous rages? And if, for example, you run out Hired Claw on turn 2 and they cast premium removal, like Go for the Throat, or, semi-premium removal, like Lightning Strike, this hand has Tursa and Screaming Nemesis. So if we put them in a position where they spend premium removal on our Hired Claw because we're threatening to protect it, then that's one less premium removal spell they have for our actual premium threats. And the single basic mountain, it does a lot. It offers a lot of flexibility. I don't particularly want to run my Emberheart Challenger or Manifold Mouse or Deep Cavern Bat out into a face-up mountain. I also don't really want to run out Shock or Cut Down into that untapped mountain. And so, against these red and black decks, you might look at this hand and really want to play Hired Claw on turn 1 and start attacking. And if I had something else interesting to do on turn 2, maybe I take that risk. Maybe I run it out there. But here, I want to put my opponent in that difficult position with my turn 2. I want to go, Hired Claw pass, leaving that mysterious mountain up to force them to think about their plays and be careful. And if they give me an opportunity to use Monstrous Rage as a counterspell, I will. I'm perfectly happy to be mana efficient, to keep my threat, and set up all that better of an attack on the next turn when I send Screaming Nemesis into the red zone. Again, doubling back to there is that third archetype of the control of the white decks running all those hate pieces for us, and that's where I'm definitely going to play Hired Claw on turn 1 because, again, they're not playing Shock or Cut Down. Their removal costs a little bit more. And if they're on the Authority High Noon lockdown plan, which many players are, there's a good chance that on turn 2, I might just take my free damage and put a counter on Hired Claw. It's not the most exciting play, but free damage is free damage. If I have a window to spend my mana, put a counter on Hired Claw, and deal an extra damage, I'm going to take it. Which is another thing I can't really do against open red mana or open black mana. Because then I spend my 2 mana, and they just kill it in response. And I've lost my whole turn 2. I haven't, done anything interesting. So we play this different kind of game based on whether or not our opponent has red mana, black mana, or white mana as their primary means of disrupting our game plan. Two lands, 5 threats. Beautiful. This is a tough one. So, again, we have Mountain Go Burst Lightning if I'm on the draw against a red deck or a bat deck. But I also have, turn 2, my very spell snareable Manifold plus Emberheart Challenger. So if I'm not interacting, I feel pretty risky running out my Manifold or Emberheart. Um, you know, ultimately, this is, pretty generically going to come down to how much removal am I playing against. This is one of those hands that you look at it and you go lands and spells. You think, yeah, this is good. And I think on average, you keep this, you draw some non-lands, and you're gaming. These are four really good cards. Um, so this is one where I think you keep. It's really hard to mulligan this very balanced, powerful hand. Um, but when I think about how am I going to sequence this, it doesn't feel great. Um, you know, Manifold on turn 2 when you don't already have another threat doesn't feel good. Emberheart Challenger on turn 2 never feels good. Um, so there's a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily say hope, but this hand needs help. I think it's enough powerful pieces that you're probably keeping it just because it's too hard to mulligan 3 lands, 4 spells, and it's 2 threats and 2 removal spells. Um, especially in the blind, but I think against really any deck, I don't have a clear sequence to victory here, which is what, makes me pause. And maybe there's players out there who would mulligan this hand. Maybe on, Wednesdays, I would mulligan this hand. Not sure about Tuesdays. Not sure about Mondays. All right, that's enough. This joke isn't very funny. I digress. I think this is a hand that's almost impossible to mulligan, but it's also one that's really hard to sequence, which I don't think necessarily makes it a mulligan. I think it's okay that like, hey, I got 4 powerful cards. I've got my first 3 land drops. Let's see what I draw. Let's see what my opponent does, and let's take it from there. This hand could, I think, go any number of ways. I think, fairly often I'm playing Manifold before Emberheart because Emberheart has haste and Manifold doesn't. But there's also the argument that like, Manifold attacking doesn't really matter. It's the triggered ability that matters. But again, I don't really want to play Emberheart Challenger on turn 2 for the vast majority of occasions. So ultimately, again, I have no idea what this hand does on turn 2. I don't think we play Challenger or Manifold Bells. We probably save Challenger for turn 3 when we can protect it, and maybe even save Manifold for turn 4 when we can offspring it. So, again, every time I try to sequence this hand, it just feels like a mulligan because there's no really particularly good way to sequence the first couple turns besides either 1, draw a good card, or 2, like hope I get a lot of mileage out of that burst lightning. So I do think it's a keep. I think it's too powerful to mulligan, but I think it's kind of too everywhere to, offer up a proposed sequence. Which doesn't make it bad. It makes it a hard hand to play. Like, I think it's really easy to look at this hand and think, oh, this is a banger. Snap keep. I'm going to win this game. But I think in actuality, this is a hand that leads to a very skill-heavy game because you have some really difficult decisions ahead based on, what threats your opponent is playing or not. There's a question of Marauding Mako, right? Do I just Burst Lightning that on sight? Probably. It definitely threatens to get out of hand. I would rather be the beatdown and apply pressure, but with this hand, what else am I doing? Like, Burst Lightning the Mako. Get out of here, man. It's one of those threats that's really dependent on how the game is going. Right? He starts at 1-1. Doesn't take long to get out of burst range. But we do have this Witchstalker Frenzy. And so, if I had more aggressive threats to play in the early game, I would rather do that. As I said at the top of the call, or hour, or video, jeez. Plan A is to develop my game plan, especially when I'm on the play. I really want to develop my game plan. Plan B is to disrupt when I have to. I don't want to be firing off my removal really early. I want to be setting up my board. But when I'm on the draw, it's kind of an occupational hazard that, I'm going second, I'm starting behind. And if I can use my Burst Lightning to kill my opponent's 2-drop, that's one of the best ways for me to catch up and get to start being really proactive with my game plan. Let's look at probably one more. No, we can't keep 5 lands. Boy. I don't know. I don't want to talk about that one. 5 lands again. 4 lands. You know who we haven't talked about a lot? It's a good time to shout out Tursa. She doesn't seem to show up in these opening hands all that often, or be super interesting all that often, but this is a hand where if Tursa was Nemesis, I'd probably mulligan this. Because Tursa is Tursa, I think I get to keep this, and I'm pretty happy about that. I really like starting the game with Hired Claw. I'm always happy to have Monstrous Rage. And I'm always happy to have a Rockface Village. I think the percentage of games you win when you have mountains and a utility land is probably much higher than the percentage of games you win when you just have mountains. And Rockface is just a really great, strong utility land. It's cheap to activate. It still makes colored mana for your other stuff. Hired Claw is the least sexy card to pair it with because it's just, +1/+0 haste. But as soon as you start breaking out those mice, you're triggering Valiant on Hero and Emberheart. You're making your 1/2 double strike into a 2/2 double strike. I really value having, Mountain Rockface as my 3 lands is really, really good. I really value that a lot. And then here, right from the opening hand, I know that if I draw more lands, I can throw away the extra mountain that I already have. Plus, if I draw an extra land to Tursa, and I feel pretty good about that. There's no guarantee that you draw null lands off Tursa, right? This hand isn't the nuts, but I am pretty comfortable keeping it because Rockface is an extra point. Hired Claw is a card that I like a lot against, as we've talked about Hired Claw a fair bit, against the shock decks. I don't want to run it out there on 1, especially because, I'm not just depending on the threat of Monstrous Rage. This hand has Monstrous Rage. But against the control decks, the deck's not heavy on 1 mana removal. I'm particularly happy to play Hired Claw on 1 because I might even put a counter on him on turn 2. So this is an exciting hand. I'm definitely slamming Tursa on 3. And my early turn, it depends on my opponent. If they have a lot of 1 mana removal, I'll Mountain Pass. That's fine. Then turn 2, I have my Hired Claw, and I get to use that 1 mana to threaten bad intentions. Make my opponent think before they act. And against decks without a lot of 1 mana removal, I'm just really excited to run out Hired Claw and probably put a counter on him on turn 2. Which I think is, a great way to start the game, because that also immediately gets him out of... Well, I'll take that back. Maybe I'll do a small cut there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But this hand is solid. And I think there's, clear sequencing based on how much one mana removal my opponent has. And then turn 3 for sure, I'm going to slam Tursa, wheel a card or two, and see what I can do to keep pressing my red cards towards my opponent in the middle and end game. All right, so that will be it for today's 1 hour of focusing on keep smalls and most importantly sequencing. I hope you found this valuable. Again, big thanks to Marcus Aurelius on Patreon for commissioning this video. I'll include my Patreon link in the description as always. It's a great place to learn and have fun. I make guides and have a really great Discord community that you gain access to by joining my Patreon. In addition, brief shout out to Heavy Play. Very excited and thankful to be sponsored by them now. I have these super fun Heavy Play sleeves that I'm just kind of fidgeting with in my hands as I exist in the world. You can get your Heavy Play products for 10% off with the link in the description. And yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the warm reception to last week's video, and I hope you enjoyed this week's too. I hope the sequel doesn't let you down. I know sequels generally have a hard time holding up to the original, but hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you learned something. And yeah, thanks again. We'll see you next time.